With 84% of cyber attacks targeting the application layer, securing your software is more challenging than ever. Synopsys enables DevSecOps with a portfolio of industry-leading tools including Coverity, Black Duck, and Seeker to help you build secure, high-quality software faster. Synopsys is the leader in application security testing. Visit securityweekly.com/synopsys to learn more. Application security is hard when security is separated from your DevOps workflow. Security has traditionally been the final hurdle in the development lifecycle. Iterative development workflows can make security a release bottleneck. With GitLab, security is built into the CI/CD process. Every code commit is automatically scanned for security vulnerabilities in your code and its dependencies. Results are delivered to the developer in their native workflow for rapid remediation. Learn how GitLab enables DevSecOps. Visit securityweekly.com/GitLab for a 30-day free trial. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACF.
Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. I'm your host, Mike Shima, joined by Matt Alderman and John Kinsella. Do you always end up missing our live streams? Need somewhere to flag Security Weekly podcasts that you want to listen to? Subscribe on your favorite podcast catcher or our YouTube channel. Sign up for our mailing list and join our Discord server to stay in the loop on all things Security Weekly. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe. In our upcoming webcasts and technical trainings, you will learn how to build a risk-based vulnerability management program, how to prevent phishing scams, and how to move beyond vulnerability scan to vulnerability fix. Visit securityweekly.com/webcast to see what we have coming up, or visit securityweekly.com/on-demand to view our previously recorded webcasts. And that brings us into our November news, end of November news. And I probably will always mention back in 1998, the Morris worm, regarded as one of the earliest distributed denial of service attacks, that was fundamentally based on a buffer overflow in RCE. So let's take a look at the news of the week to see what has changed in the world of buffer overflows and RCEs. And I see that MobileIron has been under active attack for I think a buffer overflow and an RCE, it looks like.
An RCE.
Oh, dear.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think...
Yeah. 22 years and still counting.
Still counting. Yep. And in this case, I was highlighting the MobileIron because it does fit a bit of a theme of we've highlighted. Are your security tools expanding your attack surface? And there's a little bit of, as a security industry, let's make sure that we're not unduly expanding the attack surface of what we're trying to do better. But also, this goes into this idea of another an undercurrent, I think, that we're going to discover here in a couple of the articles, is that here was an RCE, was patched back in June. There was an exploit released in September, and now the UK's National Cybersecurity Center was issuing an advisory saying it's under active exploitation. We're now in 5-6 months later. So it does speak a little bit to an application security, call it GRC as a call from our previous segment, about what's your patch management cycle, or what's your ability to release quickly? Are you stuck in a waterfall method of patching, or can you do this on a more agile aspect? And so that's why this one stood out for me.
I just think it's an interesting attack vector, right? Because this is more on the mobile side, mobile device management side. And we think about the proliferation of all these devices and people managing these devices. And here you have a flaw in the management software that now can exploit potentially all these devices that it's managing. So, it creates a very interesting attack path. And again, we talk about threat modeling, and, how many people thought about this threat vector, right? That my MDM has a flaw that now potentially, gets to all my devices, is a very interesting way to think about some of our threat modeling discussions that we've had. How many thought of this attack path?
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to draw in one of the other vulns to talk about this week, the Xbox one, which I think that's a great setup to talk about threat modeling, because here was a flaw in the fact, the way the cookie was constructed, that the Xbox user ID was presented unencrypted. So you could see an ID. Now, normally this is just a GUID, or just a string of, an alphanumeric string that doesn't really tie anything back to Matt or Mike or John, for that matter. But what this attacker or researcher discovered is that you could essentially replay, iterate through IDs and discover emails. So again, perhaps not necessarily a earth-shattering concept in terms of threat modeling, but a very specific thing to walk through, and that should have been, I want to say this should have been thought of at least in terms of what are we exposing in our cookie, and how is our app trusting content that's coming back from the consumer, or from the user, specifically the cookie as well. So, and I guess I'm going to take that pause to figure out.
I got nothing.
Either Matt, John,
you start
or
talking
PlayStation
cookies. I'm thinking I need
so.
a glass of milk or something. I'm done.
That's okay. You guys go play your PlayStation.
I'm trying to not bite. But the thought in mind is, why are we working on trusted compute modules in our Xbox when we have unencrypted IDs? Right. This is conversation continuing from last week. Yes. What I was thinking though is take a step back on what you're just saying around threat modeling, and what about target modeling, right? Because that's where this one's really sort of useful. Is you're trying to, if you're trying to actually attack a particular individual, and you can figure out they're into games, and you can figure out, they've got an email address, strike up a conversation with them. It's another of those little tiny finger holds to get in when you're trying to climb that wall. So useful to the bad guys, I guess. But was this one patched by now? It probably is. Yeah,
it was patched. And I think that you bring up a great point, John, because one of the things here is also this idea of, in the environment, what will someone attempt to do? Why is an email address useful to the attacker? And especially in gaming, there's griefing, there's potential for abuse, there's a lot of trust and safety issues around that. So this idea of protecting identity and hiding email addresses is you also introduce, kids, age under 13, these types of regulations that might also apply to that. There's a lot of important things that come in here. So I think that idea of target modeling is a great thing to talk about as well. And it also, you set us up with a good segue into this other article about prevention is better than the cure. And this particular article is talking about securing cloud native deployments. But to your point, should we be let's make sure we don't overemphasize our trusted and secure enclaves and confidential computing if we're not going to bother encrypting the cookie, for example.
Right. When I looked at this article, we've talked a number of times about the OODA loop on Business Security Weekly with Red Seal and other folks. It's a great model. The problem with this article for me is it didn't go far enough, fell a little short. To me, it's like scanning images. That's so like 2017, John, right? I mean, we've been talking about scanning container images since 2016, 2017. Okay, I'm just saying, and that's kind of where this article ends. And you're like, no, there's more to it. We got to apply that OODA loop at other stages of the CI/CD pipeline. I think she stopped a little short here. I think it was kind of a plug for some of Aqua's trivia and some of the new things that they're doing. I get it, but I wanted it to go further, because when I think about all my Terraforms, all my infrastructure code deployment stuff, I mean, we should be using the same concepts through each of those pieces and not just stop at scanning the container image.
Yeah, I think that is, I think Amazon, another article here, is kind of taking that idea, because when they're going to adopt Rust. So rather than just saying we want a bunch more tools to check for flaws. It's the idea of what if we changed our tool chain? And to your point, Matt, introduced a different programming language. And my go-to example here is always going to be, let's just deal with, rather than having more scanners for cross-site scripting, whether it's SCA or SAST or DAST, et cetera, what if we just went and used React for our front end that makes that one type of that class of vulnerabilities much harder? And I think that's what Amazon is doing here, is they're really just publicly talking about emphasizing the adoption of Rust.
Yeah, I thought this was an interesting article because they become a major sponsor for Rust, and not only sponsoring it from an open source perspective, but say, look, we're implementing Rust. Therefore, not only are we sponsoring the language, we're using the language, and we're going to hire a bunch of Rust people to continue to rewrite aspects of our platform in Rust. And so they're not only eating their dog food, they're like eating it, drinking it, sleeping it. I mean, they're doing everything with it, which I think is interesting because that means they're really committed to Rust, the language, and its longevity in the industry.
Yeah, and I think they're definitely going to move into making. Oh, go ahead, John.
Sorry, my brain's moving slower in my mouth today. I thought there was interesting that at least where this got on my radar last week was not so much this individual story, but Amazon's looking for Rust coders, which makes me think that there's not a lot of Rust coders out there that are actively looking. But it's still a fairly niche language, and I get that. But it's interesting that I think the other way to look at this is Amazon has committed to, and I think some of their nano hypervisor, so a few of their things are written in Rust now, if I remember right. But while they are committed to technology and moving forward in that direction as quickly as an Amazon can, they can't hire Rust coders quick enough. And I thought that aspect of it is sort of interesting.
Interesting.
What was it? Yeah, because they wrote Bottle Rocket in Rust, right? Which is the new container operating system, which I thought was interesting, right? And you see them making those investments. But yes, they're trying to hire more. That's why I pulled in this one article that I pulled in around kind of the 2021 skills, because if you look at the top two on that list, it's cloud security and DevOps development skills, right? And who better than an AWS driving both cloud and development kind of skill sets and needing them themselves to continue to add additional services and capabilities to their platform?
Yeah, it's a great highlight because it's pointing to that idea too, that when we're talking with Tim, rather than just saying, hey, go deploy these tools, here is now a security team saying, we're actually going to build these tools. We're going to choose a memory safe language to avoid certain class of problems. We may still accidentally not encrypt our user IDs. So there'll still be flaws out there, mistakes that can be made. But these are the skills that are providing value. Both to, obviously, if you possess them or want to go learn them, but also are demonstrating how to build better software, which is one of the things. The other article you highlighted there, Matt, too, is also AWS investing in their tool chain, building, Bottle Rocket, building more applications within Rust, but also now building more capabilities for their cloud users to adopt. And this one was with SSO and mapping to user attributes.
Yeah, I thought this was interesting, right? We talk a lot about app user data and kind of the challenges around the user and identity side. Here, Amazon's adding the ability to pull in user attributes and use that to define policies. Now, think about that for a second, right? Because now I can use attributes as part of Active Directory or from Ping or from Okta, integrate them into Amazon single sign-on service, but now use those attributes to create different rule sets and for authentication. And it allows you to address some of the challenges, I think, with identity in the cloud in a unique way. It's not about, they call it attribute-based access control, right? So instead of role-based access control, where we're used to RBAC, this is ABAC, and it's using these attributes now to define different access levels across the different cloud services in AWS. I just thought it was a really interesting and a really good write-up here from the AWS team in their blog.
Yeah, I think even going back to when we were talking about GRC briefly in the previous segment, and even they give a good example here that I think is a great use case for GRC teams, with the idea that when you have an identity system and your employee, someone moves from one team to another, often their roles or their their role-based access control, and that doesn't necessarily get updated, or if it does, it takes 30, 60, 90 days to propagate. In this case with ABAC, conceivably that team change can now have a much better governance or access control for that particular user. So I think there's a lot of things that are hidden here that can emerge as a great benefit.
Yeah, I mean, the department example they show here is really interesting. You move departments, it gets updated in AD. I don't have to necessarily wait for your role change, because your department change could now just completely lock you out of certain access control, right? So it's a really interesting way to think about it. It's integrating with the major players out there in the identity space to make it easier to manage some of this access in the cloud.
Yeah, and speaking of the cloud and containers for that matter, there's two other articles I highlighted. They're much, I think, on that broader theme of DevOps, both what is DevOps and what is security's role within DevOps. I think it is a great complement to our discussion with Tim in the sense of Dev is feeling some pain, sometimes even pushing that pain forward to ops, and they need to have good communication and data sharing to figure out, is this pain appropriate? Should I be forwarding it this much? Or if you're receiving this pain, so to speak, how can I mitigate it and control it? And there's just this good article I thought that was just kind of describing some high-level concepts that were being discussed in KubeCon recently. And two things that stood out to, I'll just start with the one thing that stood out to me, was of course talking about the developer experience and of getting out of the idea that, or avoiding the idea that there's a situation where developers view the security tools as limiting in their ability to deliver code quickly.
Yeah, so I want to go back and watch this talk, this panel. You're talking about the one with Emily and Nicholas and those guys. So for the general public, y'all out there who didn't go to KubeCon, the videos will be released, I think, in 2 weeks onto YouTube. But for those of us who were at the show or virtually at, these can be streamed on demand. If you look at the people on this panel, I mean, Emily's awesome. Nicholas has thrown his weight around in such a great way over at the Air Force. So it'd be a really interesting conversation just to listen to these guys for half an hour and see what they're talking about. And how do you actually incentivize people like this? Because this really does come back a little bit also to Tim's conversation, as you're saying, Mike, about how do you actually not just have these pieces along the way, but how can you get people to do things? So I'm looking forward to this one. Yeah,
because I'm curious. The two on here that are kind of outliers to me on this panel are Cisco and HPE. they just are to me, because I don't think of them as security first mindset per se. I mean, they can be. So I'm curious how those two fit into the panel discussion. So I want to go watch this one too, John, when it comes out, because I'm curious how somebody like a Cisco and a Hewlett Packard really position themselves from a DevSecOps perspective. Because when you look at kind of, Cisco's done some stuff on this front, on the application security side with some acquisitions, but I don't see them as kind of a real strong leader per se in the space. And I don't see much out of HPE, but definitely Emily and Christian, right? I'm like, yeah, they're rocking it in their areas. I'm just not sure how those two behemoths are doing.
Yeah, that's a good insight, Matt. I'm going to suspect that some of it is good. Those are good examples of orgs that need to embrace transformation and, let's say maintain relevancy or go through that cultural shift that, that move from a waterfall to DevOps really needs. So perhaps there's an intentional or even perhaps an unintended case study and just listening to see what challenges they ran into and are they meeting them successfully or not?
Right, because I think about those two organizations and their history. That it's like trying to turn the Titanic, right? And so maybe they have some good insights, but that's not who I would. If I were picking the panelists, those are not the two companies I'm putting on that. I'm pulling Etsy, I'm pulling Netflix, I'm pulling some of these other guys that have been successfully through this transition, or did it from ground zero. I don't think of those two as the innovators in the space, but maybe there are some lessons to be learned from some of those orgs.
I bet at the same time they've seen a lot of interesting things though, right? So Cisco's been trying for about a decade to get onto the server side back from their UCS stuff and things like that. Anytime I've got to work with security folks at Cisco, they've been great. We had Chris Romeo on here a month or two ago, and he was ex-Cisco, if I remember right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
so.
they've and anyways, where I was going at that point is they're engaging with these customers that they're trying to get them to use these products, and they are using them. So it might be interesting to hear what type of traction or friction they're seeing with their customers. So yeah, it sounds like a good talk to listen to.
Yeah, and so there's homework for the week for everyone. Go listen to some presentations. We'll try to highlight some more of those. If you remember, we highlighted Kelly Shortridge's as well a few weeks ago. I don't know, I'm going to put you on the spot here, John. Is there something else from KubeCon that you would also like to highlight or to draw people's attention to?
Unfortunately, not yet. I'm still catching up on all the talks. They were having technical issues the first week, so it was difficult for me to watch the talks live. So I'm still going back and catching up. So unfortunately, I've got no tasty morsels as of yet.
No problem.
Outside of service mesh. Oh, sorry.
Service mesh. Well, they definitely need the high quality technical team that we have here at ASW that keeps us running. That's for sure. There is, for those of you who are still then waiting for the live stream, there is some reading perhaps you could dive into. I highlighted this blog post because I also want to make sure that we do try to do our best to highlight tools, of course, which maybe we're a bit light on as we close out the year, but also just other sources for education. To answer that question, what cybersecurity skills should I have? That article that Matt highlighted, and so start your Rust and perhaps Go, of course, if you want to go onto the Google side of a programming language plus a cloud. But here are some books about DevOps in general, and of course, many of them are also having that underlying theme of how does security emerge from DevOps, or where does it place into this? And one of the things that I liked about this blog post is that it does have a little bit of, I'll tip my nostalgia hat here, a sort of choose your own adventure, deciding on what book is right for me, rather than just listing them off to say, here's one I like, here's one I like, here's another one I like. It adds, to use another throwback to our discussion with Tim, context about the information. So I don't know. I have a little list of the ones that stood out to me. I'm not sure Matt or John, but there's a book here or one even that might be missing that you would highlight.
No, I mean, a few of these we've covered before. Yeah.
Go for it.
Oh, so obviously the Phoenix Project and the Unicorn Project. I mean,
right.
Those are kind of classic books. We've talked on the SRE side from Google. We've had Google on to talk about the site reliability engineering in their book. I mean, those three we've covered on different shows over the years. A couple of these were newer, but what I like about this article is it kind of guides you where you should start. I mean, there's 12 books here, so in theory you should read all 12. But if you don't have time to read 12 like me, because I'm too busy doing other stuff, this gives you a really interesting way to figure out which book should you read first, and kind of gives you an interesting progression. So I love the way that he laid this out in really mapping out which book should I read. I highly recommend Phoenix and the Unicorn Project because those books, they build off of each other. I think they're great reads. But when you look at the other 10, here's a guide on which one should you read next.
Yeah, if I was to toss, sorry, the 4 questions at the top I think are great. Just to cite them out real quick for people who are listening and not looking at the website. Lean and agile foundations versus practicing DevOps, lean principles or agile practices, DevOps or SRE, and then are you looking for a novel or a textbook? But the mixture of books as a result of that are really great. What I'd like to see on here is maybe some of the Visible Ops series. I think Gene Kim wrote at least one of those too, so I'm not quite sure why he put two, but not that one. But yeah, I think that flowchart is awesome, and I'd love to see something like that flowchart at the top, maybe for DevSecOps or some of the other things that we talk about in security, because I'm sure you guys get it. I get a lot. What books should I be reading? What should I be doing? And when I first look at this personally, I tend to go towards blog posts. When I'm reading a book, I'm trying to get away from my day job. So, but I think this is a great list for reference to people to actually pick something to help get you a little bit further along.
Indeed. And I think the two of the books that stood out for me are one, Accelerate, one of the more recent books, I think, and really just like how that presents a way of thinking. And it really builds a case for metrics to be using within the organization, within the development organization. And one of them also just talking about deployment frequency. How quickly can you deploy, and what's that failure percentage when you do deploy? Those two really just stand out to me as great things that also have implications for, can you patch quickly? Can you respond in 8 hours to a vulnerability that's been posted to your bug bounty program? And the other one was the 5 dysfunctions of a team, because it's calling out very much of the people aspect of DevOps. And that was another thing for the theme of the previous segment, and a little bit of this one is there's a lot more than just automation. We can't automate everything and just deploy a bunch of tools and expect us to have more secure software. We have to take out our reasonably normal lawyers or dev teams or peers and build those connections with them. And the other reason I wanted to highlight too, I had an ulterior motive with this blog, is the idea of communication. Imagine turning this flowchart that John was showing for us, talking us through, into what is your risk, or how worried should I be about this new product or this new deployment or this new feature. I think this is a great way of walking people through a decision tree using data that you can a bit obscure, or maybe obscure has the wrong connotation, but just put behind on the background and highlight the context and say, this is the audience I'm talking to. Here's the information they need. And I don't know exactly which path they need to go down. Perhaps I can't quite predict it, but I can say, if you're going this way, let me ask this question and refine it better. If you're going this other way, let me ask these questions and better refine, and then bring you the data you might need. And with that, I possibly mentioned Cookie there, so I put Matt to sleep, and or they're both off reading. So I'm not sure. I think we covered our news of the week. It was a short week last week, so I'm not sure if there's something else that we forgot to mention or want to touch on real quick. Matt or John?
You know what? I'll bring us back a few stories here, and it's something I saw in the notes and gave me a moment of pause. And I think our listeners might have a little moment of pause of it too after you commented on it. On the Rust story, you drew an analogy to choosing React. And I thought that might be worth spending an additional 90 seconds or so just sort of thinking through. It's I think you've had that position before of pick some sort of front end web interface, or web framework that is secure by default, if I can use that phrase. And I thought the analogy between that and Rust was interesting. Maybe you might want to expand upon that a little bit, not to put you on the spot.
No, that's fair play, John. I appreciate it. No, I think the point there is helpful to call out is the idea that we have a lot of tools in our tool chain, and as the security team, do we want to go through the pain, if you will, to use that term of the day, and put the pain of trying to refine CSP level 1 or CSP level 2, CSP level 3 onto our developers, or build up the tooling to figure out, is this, are we writing these cross-site scripting vulnerabilities? Or are they going to show up in new and surprising ways? For example, if we have a UK real estate business listing with cross-site scripting in it, or I didn't pull this article out, but there was cross-site scripting vulnerabilities due to DNS text entries and websites not handling the DNS text fields correctly. So it's sort of, do we want to apply the tools to find them and then figure out, well, okay, our SaaS tool found it. Should our DAS now prove that it's exploitable or not so we can fix it? Or do we just want to say, what if we could get rid of this class of vulnerability? Or perhaps, to be fair, because we can't, we're talking about risk management and not 100% security, can we significantly reduce the chance of developers introducing this flaw without them even noticing? Meaning, here's a programming language that just makes it easy. And I'm almost going to do my hand-waving magic, because if you want to introduce cross-site scripting, you just need to call, dangerously set inner HTML, and use something that's quite obviously, oh, hold on a second, should we be doing this? Because Rust, for example, does have ways of diving into C and unsafe memory management, so you can still write unsafe Rust because you're diving into unsafe areas. But ideally, you're putting a lot of that capability into your compiler, into the programming language, and the security problems are just now transparent, or the security concerns and fixes are now transparent to developers. And I possibly filibustered through 90 seconds, but what do you think, John?
Oh, well,
It passes
you
the
brought
sniff
it back
test.
to the beginning, though, right? We started with a buffer overflow, right? If you were using something like Rust that was memory safe, then I wouldn't have a buffer overflow, and I still wouldn't be fighting the same issue for 22 years.
Exactly. But we would still hopefully be having some news to talk about every week. So whether you want to encrypt your Xbox user IDs or not, that's up to you, but we'll find you in the news. So I want to thank Matt and John for also joining me in analyzing the news and the DevSecOps and KubeCon and all the other things that we covered today. I want to thank all of you for listening as well, and hanging out in our Discord channel for chatting with us. And with that, I'm going to say once again, thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week on Application Security Weekly.